Hi everyone, welcome back to another crash course. So in this video, I'm going to be doing a 1-hour crash course on the Node.js stack. So this includes Node.js, which is the server, MongoDB or the database, and also a little bit of Express. So it's not going to be very in-depth, but I'm going to be going through some of the basics with you so that you know how to work with it and move on. Alright, so the first thing I want to do is get everything set up. Now I'm using Windows here, so if you want, you can just go ahead and follow installing for Mac. Now it's pretty much almost exactly the same. There may be some community documentation, but I'm using the Windows version. Alright, so let's get started. So the first thing we want to do is install Node.js. So what is Node.js? Well, pretty much it's a JavaScript engine that allows you to run and render JavaScript files. So for example, if you had a JavaScript file here that said something very simple like console.log and then just test. And if you were to run this with a certain command I'm going to show you in just a second, what this would do is print out test to the console or in this console window or wherever you're running it. So pretty much just think of it like our Chrome engine over here. So if you've ever used Google Chrome and if you go into the console here, I did Control-Shift-J by the way, and if you type out console.log and then you can put anything you want here, hello world for example, you can see it prints out hello world to the console. So this pretty much just does exactly the same thing. And you can see here it runs on the exact same engine, except it's just local. So you may think that this is pretty useless. So all you can do is print out just basic kind of things like loops or functions, but it's actually very useful. Combined with some frameworks like Express, you can actually start entire HTTP servers. And a lot of websites now are using Node.js more than ever. So why don't we get started? So you're just going to go over here to the Node.js website, and I will link this in the description. And here you can see we have a bunch of different options. So for Windows, we're going to download whichever one you want and whichever bit you're running on. So for example 64 or 32. Most of you are running on 64, I'm assuming, so you're going to download 9.8.0 current. But if you don't have Windows, all you have to do is go to downloads, and you can see we have a bunch of different things here. So you can download the source code if you want, you can download the Mac, and there's also stuff for Linux. And again, Linux is pretty useful, especially most likely if you're setting up a server, you're going to be using Linux. So just go over to the downloads page and download that. Alright, so once you're there, wrong installer, you're going to open up the installer itself. So it's going to bring you to this page. Now I already have everything installed, so I'm just going to run through it with you. So you're just going to click next. And see, I already have it here. So what I'm going to do is just change the installation. So this is pretty much what you're going to see. So it's going to show you this page here. It's going to install the runtime. So this is pretty much the engine itself. Then you have the NPM package manager. So think of it when you're building static HTML pages, you're linking to libraries like Bootstrap or Semantic UI or other libraries, maybe even jQuery. So what this does is pretty much it's the server way of linking packages. And I'm going to explain NPM a lot throughout this crash course in a second, but you're just going to install that as well. Online documentation shortcuts, you can just install that as well. It's not really a big deal. Add to path, you're going to keep that running as well. Because what this is going to have is it installs to everywhere, so you can run it everywhere. So what you're going to do is make sure that this is set to will be installed on local hard drive, or this one if you're using a large network, but most of all, you're just going to set it to will be installed on local hard drive. Next, you're just going to click next, and it's going to begin installing for you, and obviously I installed it, so I'm not going to do that now. Alright, so I'm going to cancel the installation there. Okay, so now that you have Node.js installed, before we move on, let's just talk a little bit about how to use it. So I already have my project here. Whoops, to go back to my files. Yeah, so I'm here, and you can see this is my projects folder. So this is the folder where I store all of my files, everything like that. But pretty much what's going to happen is you go into Windows PowerShell. So if you don't know how to do that, just go into the Windows key and search PowerShell. And there it is, it's right there. You're just going to open that up. And I use this instead of command prompt because it mimics some of the Mac features like mkdir and other kinds of things, so it's much easier to use and follow along. So I would recommend using this over something like command prompt. But let's just get started here. So I'm going to open up my practice server file. So I'm going to do cd into, and I'm assuming that you know a little bit about console commands, but what this does, cd, is just change directory, and then I just typed out practice server, click tab, or a little bit of it, and it autofills. So that will take me into practice server. And if I want to go back one level, so back to projects, I can just do cd and then ... Okay, let's get started. So, and I use the up arrow there. So what I'm going to do here is I have my folder opened up in my text editor, Sublime Text. You can download that if you want. I'm going to leave it in the description. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to go back to my practice server, and I'm going to save this as a basic JS file. So test.js. So I'm just going to do something very simple. It's a console.log. We all know what that is. And save that. And now the way to run a file is you type out node and then the name of the file. So in this case, it would be test. And of course, you have to add the file extension as well, which is JS. And if I click enter, you can see it prints out test to the console. And I can do this with pretty much anything I want. 1 + 1. Whoops, didn't mean for that to happen. It will console.log out 2. We can run functions as well if we want. So I'll just make a basic function. You know, maybe it'll take one argument. And then a times a, let's just say. And then we'll run test on 2. So we're expecting 4 here. And if I run that, you can see it gives out 4. So you can run pretty much any JavaScript you want. So there's a few more things I'd like to talk about. There's also one other command you can run with Node, and it's just Node. So what this does is bring up like a JavaScript REPL. So this is pretty much just the same, except you're not running it from an external file. You're actually typing it in. So I can do console.log 1 + 1. So it's just like the console up here that we were using. That's pretty much what it is. It's just in this window. All right, so if you want to get out, just do Control-C and Control-C twice, and it will bring you out of the Node REPL. All right, so let's install MongoDB now. So I haven't really talked much about what it is, but pretty much MongoDB is a database that allows you to store and persist data. So it's a non-SQL database, which means it doesn't run off of SQL. It's not tabular. It's not, it's not very rigid like SQL. It's more flexible, and you can free things up, and everything becomes just a lot easier. So instead of having tables and associations, you can instead have nested data, and it's sort of like a tree. So I like MongoDB, and most people use it with Node. If you want to use SQL, go ahead, but I'm not going to be talking about SQL in this tutorial series. All right, so what I'm going to be doing is installing it. So I have the Install MongoDB Community Edition on Windows open up here. So the first thing you're going to do is go over to the Download Center, and you're going to most likely be on the Atlas page. So you're going to want to click on Community Server. And now here, there is a bunch of different things, and you're going to install whichever version you want. Okay, so let's get started. Once you have that downloaded, you're going to go over to the Welcome to MongoDB blah 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 setup wizard. So you're going to click Next. Again, I'm going to click Change to run you through. Again, you're going to make sure we explained this with Node.js before. You're going to install wherever. And then next, wait, I want to go back for a second. Install MongoDB Compass. We don't need that. But most likely it's going to show, I'm actually just going to run this again, but most likely it's going to show a setup. It's going to show where you want it installed. So by default, it installs somewhere in program files. So we don't actually want that. So let me just open that up again. Okay, so most likely it's going to show a feature here where you can change your download directory. So it's going to show something like program files. There is somewhere in here a default download. Yeah, right here. Program files, MongoDB server 3.6. So what I would recommend is go to browse, and then you want to create a folder in your user. So you want to go to C. So you want to go to your C drive, and then /users, like here, and then whatever your username is, and then in that user folder, you're going to create a folder which contains all of your projects. So I would recommend just saying this proj or whatever you want, but this contains all of your projects. And that is where you're going to want to install it. And the reason is because if I actually type clear here, and if I actually close off the PowerShell, I'm going to open that again. PowerShell. And I'm going to pin that. You can see that the default directory is actually your user. So you're going to want to set it somewhere close because you're going to have to run an executable when it comes to this. And if you set it somewhere far, it just doesn't work very well. So you're going to want to set it to somewhere near your users folder. Okay, so once you're done that, you're going to install it. And now we have just a little bit more to go, and then we're done installing. So after that, it's going to give you this prompt. So what you're going to do is copy this into some text editor. And right under here, you're going to want to change the install location to wherever your file is. So in this case, it would be my user folder. So wherever you installed it in the installation, and you keep that, and then you just paste that into the console. So once that's done, whoops, didn't mean for that to happen. And once that's done, you're going to move on to the next step. So we already have all of this done, but now you need to actually initiate somewhere to save all of your data. So I would recommend just pasting this directly into the console. You can change it if you want, but if you don't need to change it, now usually what you can do is go into your path, right? And then what you're going to do is copy this and again change the directory where the data is saved. So you can save it to that if you want it all stored in one folder, if you want to access it or whatever, but we can access it in a different way. I'll show you that later. So you're just going to copy this and paste it into the console. So after that, mostly all of your things are done. So you're pretty much installed MongoDB. So now let's get started on actually setting up our application. So we're going to configure and create a few things. Now, first of all, I just want to delete this, but I'm going to create a few folders. So the first folder we want to create is called views. So views pretty much contains all of the different templates, and I'll explain what templates are in a second, that you're going to be using on your items, so on your web app. So you're going to contain everything inside these views right here. In here, you're going to put a new thing called partials. There you go, partials. Then you're going to create a new directory in your root called public. And this is going to contain all of your external front-end assets. So all of your Bootstrap, maybe CSS, JS. So inside public, you're going to create two folders. It's going to be CSS and JS. And now inside each one, you're going to create a folder called lib. So what lib is pretty much libraries. So in each folder, it'll be sorted into CSS and JS. And then in each folder, whichever one it is, there's going to be one folder for libraries, and then the root will be reserved for any of your actual style sheets or scripts. So we're going to put lib in there. And I know this is a lot. If we go and look at our folder structure, you can see we have a lot of different files over here. But don't worry about that. Once we have everything, it's a really good way to sort it. All right, so the next thing you're going to do is you're going to create a server file. So this is going to be the file that all of your other features run off of. So when you do Node, you're going to run that server file. And this is going to contain the listener for your HTTP server, all of the routing, the server-side logic. So this is going to be your main file. So usually this would be called index.js or app.js. Now I prefer app.js, but you can choose whichever one you want. Just make sure you know the name. So what we're going to do is create a new file here. We're going to close off our test.js. We don't really need that. I'm going to delete it as well, in fact. So what you're going to do is just save this file as whatever you want. So I'm going to save it as app.js. Make sure it's in the root directory. It's not in any of the folders. All right, so next thing we're going to do is actually configure our app. So what we're going to do here is install all of our packages. And I haven't introduced NPM yet, but what pretty much is, it's called Node Package Manager. And I've talked a little bit about it, but I'm going to be teaching you how to use it now. So before we do that, we want to create a package.json file. So we have a very easy way to do this, but what this is going to do is just contain some basic information about your app. So the starting point, the test commands, the author, description, so that other apps, if they wanted to interact with it, maybe if you have an API or something very similar, you can use it in that way. So it's called a package.json file. So what you're going to do in your console, make sure you are in your root directory, which is practice server for me. It's going to be whatever folder you want that's going to contain your server and everything, not your projects file, because this contains all of your projects. It's in the actual project folder that you're working on. So what you're going to do is just type out npm and then init. And this is going to bring up a JSON setup kind of file. So the first thing is the package name. So I'm going to keep it as practice server. Version 1.0. Description, I'm just going to say a practice server for setting up Node.js. The entry point, which is going to be the name of your server file, in this case it's app.js, and you can just leave test command, git repository, if you have one, you can enter that. Keywords, we can leave that. Author, you can put whatever you want here. I'm just going to put the name. License, and then that's pretty much it. And once that's done, it will create that package.json. If we open it up, you can see it's this JSON file. Now I'm not going to go into JSON and everything, what it is, but pretty much all you need to know is that this is for other apps to interact with your app. All right, so let's get installing. So the way to install a package, I'm going to click no. The way to install a package is with the npm install and then the name of the package. And then after that, you're going to include --save. So I'll explain what that is in just a second. But the first thing we want to install is Express. So Express is the framework we're going to be using. So this is going to handle all of the routing. So like if you go to /register, what is it going to do? Is it going to create something, create a user, interact with a database, whatever you want? So the first thing we're going to install is npm install and then the name of the package, which is Express --save. And it may take some time to install, but you can see there that it has installed. It's going to create a new folder in your directory called node modules, which is going to contain everything you need for that package. So on top of that, you can also install multiple packages at the same time. But before that, I'm going to go and show you what it did. So you can see under here, it shows dependencies. So this is also including the --save is including in your package JSON file that your app has to have Express or is dependent on Express to run. So it just gives some information about what your app needs. So on top of that, you can actually install multiple packages at the same time. So for example, I can do npm install package 1, package 2, package 3, all the way I want. Just make sure they're separated by a space. So let's install the rest of the packages. I'll explain what each one is as we're going along. So the next thing we want to install is EJS. So EJS is a templating folder / file. And what it does is it allows you to include JavaScript in your HTML files. So it's like a sort of template that allows you to interact with the server and include JavaScript. So if you wanted to do a for loop that creates a bunch of HTML elements. So if you wanted to do a for loop that creates 10 H1s, you could do that. And what it does is it renders out into an HTML file. So in the browser. So next thing we want to install is Mongoose. So Mongoose is the JavaScript ODM. So what it does is it allows us to interact with the MongoDB database. You could do this raw, but this helps it out a lot. You could interact with your database through Mongoose and create, edit, CRUD, the basic for, which is create, read, update, delete. So you can do all of that through Mongoose. So the next thing we want is body parser. So body parser, when sending forms, now I'm not going to go into forms now, but this is pretty much a necessity. Body parser, what it does is it allows to parse the body from like a string to actual raw elements which you can interact with in your JavaScript. So if you have a login form, if you tried to send the information, it wouldn't work because it's not parsed. So what body parser does is pretty much just parses the information so that you can interact with it. So you can install body parser as well. And that's pretty much it. So we're going to go --save. And what that's going to do is install all of our packages. All right, so there we go. We have all of our packages installed. Next thing we want to do is start actually inserting them into the app. So what happens is in each package, there is something called module.export. So this is all of the exports that's going to happen. So it can export functions, objects, arrays, whatever it wants. Usually it would be functions. And what you can do is use something called require to capture these exports in a variable. So I'll show you what I mean. So what it's going to do is var1 equals require and then package name. So this is pretty much just the structure of how it works. So usually you change this to a const. I'll explain that in just a second. But first, basically, it's the name of the variable and then the name of the package. Require, and then in a string, the name of the package. So in its exports, this could include things like, let's just say, stringify. So what you would do is var1 dot stringify. So you would use the name of the variable to use these methods. So in the actual package, it could be a different name. But remember, when you're doing this, what happens is all of these exports is stored under that variable. So imagine as an object, as an empty object. And what happens is this package packages everything into a box or this giant object. And what you do is you store that object under a variable name, and then you can access it however you want. So this is pretty much how we're going to do it. So the first thing you want to do is require express. So it's var express, or this is the default or the most commonly used way. Again, express can be named whatever you want, but it's good to follow the common sort of theme or however other people are working. So you're going to do require, and then the name of the package is express. And then after that, you're going to do var app equals express. So pretty much, let me explain this. So it captures all of this stuff under the express variable. However, express is actually a function. So it exports a function to the express variable. And what happens is when you run this function, it creates all these different methods and objects and stores them under the variable name, which is app. So there we go. And app is going to be our main, what we're going to be using. So to handle all the routes, to redirect, all of that. So next we're going to require the rest of our packages. So first thing we want to require is var mongoose, which is our ODM, equals require mongoose. So we required mongoose there. Let's see whatever other packages you there. We don't need to require EJS because we're not using it on our server file. So I think we have to require body parser. So let's require body parser. Var body parser equals require body dash parser. And one thing I'd like to do, instead of having all of these as variables, what we're going to do is actually erase these, and we're going to change it to a constant. And the reason being, and I'm just going to add commas there to show you what's going on. The reason that we're doing this is because variables can be changed. So you can accidentally change app to a string. So then you couldn't do app.get, app.post, app.require, app.use, whatever you want, because it would return an error because app.use is not a function, not an object, whatever you want. Because you may have accidentally changed it. So what you want to do is change this to const. So what const is it's very similar to variables, very similar to the keyword var. The only difference is that constants cannot be changed. So if you define something as a constant with const, it cannot be changed. So it's just a little bit of a safer way to go. So now we have to do a few things. First thing we have to do is make sure that we can use the public directory. So I'm not going to go into detail. These are just kind of the lines that you need to keep repeating over and over again with every app. So I'm just going to go ahead and type these out here. Wait, one thing. I'm just going to type these out here and you can copy them over. I will paste all of this. I will paste this whole folder in the description as a download link. So this basically allows us to serve the public directory so we can use all of our CSS JS libraries. Let's do a few other things. Encoded. So this line pretty much just allows us to use body parser, just configures body parser in a sense. And these are pretty much the only two lines. Now what I like to do is go through line by line and just like copy them from place to place. We also have one more line, app.set view engine EJS. So when we're res.rendering, I'll explain that in a sec and when we get to that part. But in this, what we're going to be doing is pretty much, instead of having to say res.render file.ejs homepage.ejs, we can just say homepage. So we don't have to include the file extension, which is pretty useful. Okay, so now let's talk about actually working and using on our database. Now we're going to set up the actual HTTP server in just a second, but I want to talk about the database for a little bit. So pretty much the database, or to actually run the database, you need to run an application. So if we go back into projects, which is where I installed my database, go into bin, you can see we have Mongo and MongoD. So pretty much MongoD is the application that runs the database and keeps it running, whereas Mongo is the shell that allows you to interact with the database. So let me just explain that in a sec. So I'm going to open up our shell right here. I'm going to open a new one. Now if I cd into project, if I cd into projects and I do dot, which stands for the current directory /bin /MongoD, you can see that all of this stuff comes up. So this pretty much means that our MongoDB database is running. So you can also do dot/bin/mongo, which is going to run the shell, which allows us to interact. So I'm not going to go over the Mongo shell in this video, maybe a little bit long. And obviously we can't connect, you can see, because our database isn't running. But if it were, it would bring up the Mongo shell where you can see all the databases and users and a bunch of other stuff. So we can obviously interact with this a lot, but we won't really be using it that much other than testing. So now that I've explained a little bit about the database, let's actually finish setting up the server so we can get it running here. So what I'm going to do is close off the rest of this stuff. And what you want to do is go here and you're going to do HTTP is equal to require HTTP. Make sure you have the comma because we don't have const over and over. We just use the comma so we don't have to keep saying that. And then you're going to do server is equal to http.server and then app. So this creates a server and then stores it under app. So I don't really want to go too much into what's happening, but this allows us to interact with our app here. Okay, so let's actually get our server up and running. So if you go over to your Google Chrome browser and go to localhost, without any HTTP, www, just want to go to localhost. That is going to be the local server. It's on every single computer. It doesn't matter where it's from. Doesn't matter. Every single device has a local server. So we're actually interacting with this local server. And what you're going to do is add a listener. That's what's going to happen is if there's an interaction with the server, then it should display some data. So listen for interaction on our local server. So what you're going to do at the very bottom, app.listen. So the first argument is the port, then the IP, and then the callback. So under the port, you can put pretty much whatever port you want. So there are many ports for each IP. So pretty much if I go to localhost 3000, it can display something different. So you can have a bunch of different ports if you're running multiple processes, and it's very useful. So MongoDB runs on a port of 27017. This something could run on port 80, something could run on port 88, 8888, 3000. It doesn't matter, but pretty much it's just to run multiple processes so that there's no conflictions. Because remember, if you run two processes on the same port, they'll conflict and cancel each other out. So there are many things that run on different processes. So here you're going to put the port. Now obviously no one's going to input something like google.com:3000 and the colon stands for the port name and then you have the port number. But by default the port, so if you just go to anything, google.com, the default port is going to be 80. So you're going to have your port here, make sure it's in a string. Next you're going to have the IP. So this is going to be the name of the server. Now in our case it's localhost. localhost, and then you're going to have your callback function. So this is what's going to happen after the listener is initiated. So we all know what callback functions are. I'm assuming you have some basic knowledge of JavaScript when you came to this. If you don't, please go and get some general knowledge, because I'm going to speed through kind of things like this quickly. So we're just going to do a basic console.log and then put something random here. So let's just say started the server. Okay, there we go. So next thing we want to do is see what happens when we run this server. So what you're going to do is do node app.js. So you're going to run app.js. Let's see what happens. It says started the server. Let's go to our browser here and refresh, and you can see it says cannot get /. And don't worry about that. That's because if you get this message, that means it works. That means it's because we don't have any handlers. But you can see our server is running now. Before we had that page where it says cannot connect, but now we actually have something running here. So that's a good sign. Next, we're going to start working on the routing. All right, so let's talk about routes. So what are routes? So when you go to any website, let's just go to google.com. And what you do is google.com/register/home. So anything here is a route. So anything after /. By default, it is the / route, the root route. And I know it's a little bit confusing, but pretty much when you go to the default, so www.google.com, that is the root route, so the home route. So there is a way to work with how it's working. And you can see I shut it off there. Let's start it back on. And in Express, and that's why we're using it, there's a way to work with it. So let me just type out what's going to happen. So app.http verb, and then the route, callback, request, and response. So pretty much this is what's going to happen. The HTTP verb is how you make the HTTP request. So I'm not going over how HTTP requests work because it's a little bit lengthy and complicated to understand. But the main ones are get requests and post requests. So most likely you'd see app.get here, and the route in a string would be where the route is coming from. So if it's the root route, it would be /. If it's the register, it would be /register. If it's /task/create. You can do as much as you want here. We're also going to go over parameters. We'll talk about that in a sec. But for now, let's just talk about this, the root route. So there we go. And now under callback, it's going to be our function. So let's type out function there. And now we have two things here. We have the request and the response object. So these actually stand for something. So the request object contains everything about the request. So this could include your username for your session. We're not going over all of authentication now. It could include any sent data from a form. It can include things like that. And the response object is what's going to be sent back. So res.render, which renders an EJS template or a PHP template or whatever you want, for example, sending something to the page. So let's just do something very simple. When the home route is gotten, or when someone goes to the home route, we're going to do res.send. So what this is just a method that allows you to write something on a page. And I'm just going to say, welcome to the home page. Very simple. And remember, every time you make a change, you have to restart the PowerShell. You have to rerun the node app.js, because obviously it's not real time. You have to keep running the app.js over and over. So let's run that. Started the server. If we refresh the page, it says welcome to the home page. So we can do this with pretty much as many things as we want. So if I go here, I can do /register, and of course our callback function, request, and response. There we go. And you can do res.send, and then welcome to the register page. And now if we restart the server, we go to the home page, it still displays the same thing. We go to /register, it says welcome to the register page. So there we go, we did that. Now let's talk about parameters. So parameters are a way of capturing something in an ID. So pretty much over here, if I do /register / blah, 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 there's actually a way to capture this and work with it. So let me just talk about how it is. So under register, let's do a new / and then you're going to do colon and then whatever you want here. So I'm just going to say text. Now pretty much any request to /register / and then anything here will be captured in something called rec.params or request.params. So it would be rec.params.text in this case because it's /text. So what we want to do in this case, and I'll just show you, is we're going to send rec.params.text. So let's refresh the page. And obviously we need to restart the server, forgot about that. And you can see it sends that text back. So we can do hello over there, obviously. And there we go. You can see hello there is sent back. So obviously we're not just going to send it back every time. There's a lot of different ways to work with this, but you can actually export it and use it in your templates. And now we're going to start explaining them. So let's move on to templating. All right, so templates are pretty much a way to create a template of an HTML page. So this is always dynamic and will always be changing. So let's just say you went to localhost / index.html. So this is always going to be the same. And if you wanted to change it, you'd go and actually change the HTML file. But what EJS does and what templating does is it takes the template or the template file, it constructs the page. So it renders, it renders out the page and then it sends it to the browser. So what you're seeing on the browser is actually HTML, but what you're doing in the backend is rendering actual EJS. So it's a template file. So I'm going to be teaching you how to work with this now. So what you're going to do is go over to your views folder, and under views, you're going to have all of your templates. So let's go into our views folder under practice server views, and we have to call this views. We can't call this anything else because that's the folder that Express uses. We'll talk about partials last, and because I want to save that for last. But let's go and create a new file, and I'm actually going to create it from here. And I'm going to save this in views, and you're going to save it as whatever you want. I'm just going to call it home.ejs. So for now, what you're going to do is didn't mean to do that. For now, I'm going to put whatever I want. So this can be pure HTML. Now, obviously, Sublime Text doesn't have HTML, so I'm going to have to do whatever I am going to have to type out all from scratch. So I can say, hello there. But what I can also do is type out some JavaScript. So we're going to talk about EJS tags in just a second, but what I can do is use JavaScript, and let me just introduce this in a second. So first thing you want to do is go here, and let's say I wanted to export something like maybe a name or a parameter in this case to the register page. So first thing I want to do is make sure that whenever you go to the register route, you want to render out your page. So what you're going to do is do res.render, remember, and then in here you're going to put the name. So let's just put home, and the second parameter is going to be an object. So in this object you have two things: name on template and then data here. So the name on the template is going to be how you're going to access it on the template, and then the data here is going to be the data here. So the name of the template here, let's just call it text. And then the data here, let's just pass out the rec.params.text. So this is going to pass in text as rec.params.text to the home.ejs template. So now let's talk about EJS tags. So I'm just going to include a doc type here so I can actually type out pure HTML. So there are three types of EJS tags, and I'm just going to type them out here in a second. And there's obviously many more, but I'm just going to be talking about the three main ones. So these is the open, the greater than sign, this less than sign, percentage, and then the percentage and greater than. There is the same thing except with an equals first, and then the same thing with a dash first, or a hyphen, whatever you want to call it. So these two tags are used for pure logic. So for example, if you passed in text and you wanted to do something like if text is equal to undefined, then pass in hello there, for example. So you'd pass any JavaScript, any raw logic into these tags. Into this tag, you're going to pass in JavaScript that you want to be rendered onto the page. So here I would pass in, for example, our text thing from our object. And what this is going to do is render text onto the page. And this is almost exactly the same as this, except it includes actual HTML. So if you had something like text here in the text parameter, it would be something like h1 hi and then /h1, something like that. What would happen is if you pass this into something here, it would render out the HTML, so it would actually display the h1 as HTML. So those are pretty much the differences. Now let's just talk about using them. So I want to put here in our item here in our template, I want to render out our text object. So what I'm going to do is do our text tag, and then we're going to go text, which is our object, our item that we passed in from here, remember? And then the closing tag. So let's just go ahead and close off the page and see how that works. And you can see that it passes it in as an h1. So obviously we can do a bunch of different things. Now let's do something else with another parameter. So I'm going to do /display. So let's do this. So what I'm going to do is pass in display as rec.params.display. And what's going to happen is this is obviously just for testing, but I want to introduce logic here. So I want to say here / could be true or false, or yes or no actually. So let's just say if the display is equal to yes, then we're going to display this. So let's do that. Now what we're going to do here is in our logic tags, remember, without that equals, we're going to do if display is equal to yes. And remember, you cannot write just pure JavaScript. You always have to include them in the tags. So any JavaScript, even one curly brace has to be included in the tags. So what this is pretty much saying is if display is equal to yes, which is our item here, then display this. So let's go ahead and try that out. You can see we have a problem there, and that's most likely because of our object problem. We don't have a comma here. Yeah, that's the problem. Again, this is an object, so you have to make sure that you do it in all object terms. So obviously commas. Let's run that again. We started the server. So we refresh here, it says can't register. Again, that might be a little bit of a problem. Yeah, and that's because we changed the route. So let's just say no for now. You can see it doesn't display anything. But if we change that to yes, whoops, didn't mean to open up the console. You can see it displays hello there. So that's pretty much the pure logic of how it works. So that's pretty much it for rendering and all of that. But we still have a few more things to cover. And the last thing I want to cover is using Mongoose. So we already did everything about Express and all of that, but we want to actually start talking about interacting with Mongoose and with the MongoDB database. So the first thing we want to do is configure our app there. So I'm just going to actually move these configurations up because we want the routes before the configurations. So what I'm going to do is do something called mongoose.connect. So we're going to do mongoose.connect, and then it's going to be, and this is the format that you always have to follow, MongoDB, localhost, and it's always localhost no matter the browser or anything, and then the DB name. So I'm just going to type this out as practice, and when you run the app for the first time, it's going to connect to this and start working. So I'm just going to run the app again, and this may not create anything. We need to actually run our MongoDB process. You can see there that it's not connecting because we aren't running it. So let's do that. /bin/MongoD. There we go. So now let's get working. So let's just close this off and connect again. And there we go. It says started the server and there's no problems. And you can see it gave us some connections there. Where's the connection from? All of that. All right, so there are a few things that we need to get set up. So the first thing we need to talk about are schemas. So what is a schema? So think of a schema as pretty much a blueprint for how your database structure is going to look like. So let's just pretend that it's a user for now. So we're just going to do this. var user and then this schema name equals new mongoose.schema. And then you're going to pass in as a function and then an object. So in this object, you can put whatever key value pairs you want. So let's just say there's an email, and then we're going to put a colon there. Sorry, I meant a comma. We're going to put a username and a password. There we go. So now you're going to put the type of item here. So for here, it would be a string, and a string. So I'm not going to go into the more advanced concepts. And there's obviously a lot more to Mongoose. This is just a crash course. I don't want to crowd you with all of this information, but this is just the blueprint. How do we actually use it? So what you're going to do is go var and then the name of your model. So let's just call this user. And then you're going to do mongoose.model. And then now you have two arguments. So you have the collection name and then the schema. So this is actually going to model your schema into something that you can use, create, read, update, delete. And you have to use this as the singular. So if I type in user here, in your database, it would show as users. If you type course here, it would show as courses. So I know it's a little bit confusing, but Mongoose pretty much just turns this into the plural. So because we have users, you're going to put user here. And then you're going to have your schema, which is user schema. So this is going to model user in our database. So there we go. Now that we have started the server and everything's modeled, let's actually talk about creating something. So there's this really cool function that we can use, and it's called user.create. So all we have to do is type out user.create, and then we're going to do that. And we have an object there. So now we're going to use our blueprint. So let's just set the email to hi@hi.com. We're going to set our username to hi. Remember, don't forget the commas. And then our password as hi. So there we go. Now, after you have your object, you're going to have a function. Now you're going to pass two arguments to this. We're going to have error and user. So the error is going to be the error if an error happens, and then the second argument is going to be your newly created user. So you can call this whatever you want. You can call this foo, world, but usually you call this by the name of the collection. So this is the way it would work, and this is the way that most Mongoose items and IDs work. So what's going to happen is you're going to do if and then error. So if there's an error, you're going to do return console.log error. Actually, you'd redirect to some sort of page first. So I'm just going to do /error for now. We don't actually have that route set up. We're going to talk about that at the very end in just a second. But let's just get started. So we have, if there's an error, it would redirect to the error and then return console.log error. So it would short circuit the entire function here. Else, you would do something with this user. So let's just have a variable up here called logged in user. Now obviously this wouldn't be production, but I'm just doing this for time's sake. So right here we'd have logged in user is equal to user. And one thing I need to note is that if you make any changes to your user, you have to save it after. We'll talk about saving and all of that in just a second. But we have that set up. Let's close our server and launch it again. And all of this is done, so I'll just erase this whole thing now, or comment it out at least so you can see what's going on. And we have everything set up here. So why don't we go into our Mongo shell. So if you actually go and open up a new PowerShell, and you're going to cd into your projects folder, whichever one that is, and then you're going to do /bin/mongo. Opens up our Mongo shell. So let's first, I'm not going to explain the Mongo shell. So show DB is pretty much just shows all the databases. We're going to use our practice. So we're going to do use practice. And then we're going to do db.the collection name, which is users, .find. This is going to find all of our users. You can see we only have one here, which is our item here. So our email, hi, username, hi, password, hi. So we also have this ID here. So each item is given a unique ID, which is pretty much impossible to have the same one because it's such a long ID. There can be a near infinite amount of practices or objects in it. So there we go. We have our object here. There's a lot of different commands we can use, but we're going to do all of this through our app.js file. So now we have our object here, but how can we access it? So let's say we wanted to access something through our request. So the way that Mongoose works, I'm just going to show you here. You would find the item, and then you would edit it, and then you would save it. So the first thing you do is find the item in the database. You can't just pull it out of the fly. You have to actually find it in the database. Then you do all the editing. If you want to update it, delete it, save it, whatever you want. And then you would actually save it back to the database. So I'm going to do this with our register route. So this is going to be quite easy. So under the text item here, what we're going to do is do a user. Remember, it's user because that's the name of the model. User.find. And there's many different finds. You can have find by ID. You can have a lot of different things. So remember, each one is given an ID. I'm not going to talk about ID for now. I'm just going to talk about this. So the first thing you would pass in is an object talking about all the different things. So you can see if we go into our Mongo shell here, I think this is the process. Yeah, let's go back into our shell, which is right here. So you can see we have a bunch of different items. So let's say we wanted to find it by the username. So we'd pass in this user.find object, username is equal to rec.params.text, because let's just say we're trying to find something by our username. So you put it in here and it would find something by the username. After the object, you're going to pass in your callback function error and user. So we all know how this works. If there's an error, you want to console.log the error, make sure you return that, res.redirect/error, and then you would, sorry this is taking a while, but it's always good to do good error handling. So you'd return your console.log, and then else you can do whatever you want with this. So let's just say our logged in user is equal to user, or let's even update it. So I want to, for example, change the email. So this is just treat this like a normal object. So what you're going to do is use user as that found user. So you're going to do user dot whatever you want here. So let's just say for now dot our username, or actually let's do something a little bit better. Our email, let's say. So our email, and then we can set that to something like we changed the email. But there's one small problem. This will most likely return an array. So to be safe, you want to always select the first one. So remember, when you find something, there could be more than one person with one find. So let's say if you find this by the email, there could be more than one user with that email. So you only want to select by the first item, or do some other sort of handling that can select something, or just completely block having same usernames or items at all. But that's up to you. For now, we're just going to do var first user is equal to user and then 0. So that's going to be the first one. I know this is a little bit confusing, so let's just change that to users. There we go. And now what we're going to do is first user dot email is equal to we change the email. But now we want to do one more thing. We're going to erase that there. We want to do user, or actually first user dot save. What this is going to do, function error, and then return the user. So pretty much what this is going to do is select it's going to it's going to save our user to the database, and then it's going to return the saved user. So we're just going to say here, logged in user is equal to user. So again, this entire file, I'm going to include it in our item there. In the description, you can download that. I'm going to explain all of this with comments if you want to work with it. But pretty much, you can just do whatever you want there. So now let's run our server and see how that works. So we're going to go to localhost/register, and then we're going to find it by our username. So our username is hi, so let's just search hi. And obviously it doesn't do anything, so why don't we just pass in our logged in user. I'm going to pass in logged in user as logged in user. And I know this is a little bit confusing. This is the name in the database, or this is the name in the template, sorry, and then this is the data or the variable. So let's go into our template, and then we're just going to console.log logged in user, or not console.log, sorry, we're going to print it out there, dot username. And we don't want that display is equal to yes anymore. We don't really need that. So let's just do that there. And as well, why don't we actually just do all of the features? So we're going to create another, we're going to copy that over and then do that for everything. So we're going to do that for the email as well. And remember, it's stored as an object in the database, so you can access it pretty much just like an object. And then we're going to console.log password. And obviously you're not going to do this in any production applications, but we're going to do it for now. Okay, there we go. We fixed up our template. And let's refresh the page, see what happens. We get a few errors. So if we go here, it says logged in user is not defined. So why is this? Well, when we go over to our user.find and everything's nice and good and everything, when we set logged in user to user, it pretty much just set this to undefined. And this is a big problem because that means that we're not actually passing in, it's not saving anything to the database. So this is pretty much a pretty easy problem to fix, and because it only returns one user, it returns one item. So what we're going to do is just erase this whole line, and we're just going to change this to first user to save time. Now let's refresh our server. We get a little bit of a problem there, don't worry about that. We have to change that to first user. We're going to change that to first user as well. Now let's just check it out. I just realized there that I forgot a comma, so let's add that there. Now it should work, and just bear with me, there's a little bit of a problem there. So let's go ahead and check that out. We still get an error. So it says cannot read the property username of undefined. So pretty much what this is saying is that we cannot find a user with this. So what we're going to do is, instead of passing this in, we're just going to find all of the users, which is only one for now, and then work with it that way. So now let's refresh the app. And I wanted to show you how to do this, but it's a little bit of a problem. All right, so we can see here that there's a little bit of a problem, and it says cannot read property username of undefined. So one very important thing we have to talk about here is debugging. So there is going to be a lot of errors in your code, and it's not going to be very clean. There's going to be stuff that's really going to bug you, and it's not going to know how to solve it. So one way of doing this is through debugging. So I went into the database here, and I'm going to do db.users.find. And you can see that the email is updating properly and saving to the database. But the problem is that it's not exporting properly. So this is a very important step, is locating the source of the problem. So one way to do this is simply just taking this out and pasting it into our save as the callback. So this is going to help out and just make things a little bit better. You can see here we have a little bit of an issue. It says logged in user is equal to first user, but there's a semicolon there. So we're going to do that and then also paste that into our callback there. So we're going to see what that does and how that looks. Just indent all of that properly. Now let's restart the server and see what happens. And you can see it may take a while, obviously, because there may be some bad error handling or some timeout issues, but everything is working properly now. And that's because, remember, we fixed that issue where that spelling issue. So make sure, first of all, you look through your code and make sure everything's working properly before you move on and do some stupid things. And because there could be just some really bad spelling error that's just breaking your code completely. So first step of action, remember this probably isn't working because of a timeout. Let's move that back out. But again, so this is the course of action when it comes to debugging. The first thing you're going to want to do is work on looking for spelling errors. So you're going to read through everything and look for any errors that you could have in your code. The next thing you're going to want to do is locate the source of the problem. So you can do this through console.logging things, running the server, just locating the source of the problem somehow. Next thing you want to do is try and fix it with the current method you're using. So you're going to maybe refactor something, maybe you have a mistaken curly brace or something. And then finally, if that's not working, then it's most likely because your method is broken, some sort of logic error. So you're going to want to switch up your method. And that's happened to me multiple times. And it happened to be the actual source of the method. It wasn't a spelling error or anything. And usually you'd see this after rerunning through your code multiple times and it's still not working. So that's mostly because of your actual method. So you're going to want to fix that up. Let's do that one more time and refresh. And we still get the same error. Obviously, it seems like we have a little bit of an issue with moving the text, but don't worry about that. I don't want to make this video too long. And again, this bug is a little bit annoying, but I'm going to have to fix that. But the fact is, we have saved everything properly. So let's just go over the find method and Mongoose method. So first thing you're going to do is find it. You can pass in parameters here. You're going to want to handle that error properly. Then you're going to want to put in your else statement. So if it's correct or if there's a problem, I'm actually going to erase this else statement because we don't really need it at this point. So we're going to do that. And whoops, I need to do that. So we erase that else statement. And after you handle that error, once you found that user, you can change whatever you want. You can change his email, you can delete things. Then you're going to want to save it back to the database with a .save. Remember passing in error and then first user. And after that, remember handle the error and everything. And then once you're done with that, you can pass it into an object if you want. You can work with that. But for now, instead of changing it, why don't we actually just pass in the object directly? So we're going to move this back in, and instead of handling it with the global variable, we're just going to pass in logged in user as first user. Now let's refresh. And again, this bug is pretty annoying, but don't worry about that. We just covered all of the methods of how to use Mongoose. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So I will include this file and everything else in the description for you to see. So everything is working and you can see what's going on. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you for watching this video, and I will see you in the next crash course.